This is our final part in our study of Nehemiah's life, and I feel like we've covered a lot of ground together, but I sense that I owe you an answer to one hugely important question, and that's this. Why would anyone be willing to be a lay hero? I mean, why would anyone be willing to feel the brokenness and to give up a comfortable life and to face one obstacle after another, to be accused or intimidated or face some other kind of opposition, all for people who are fickle at best? I mean, that's one of the things that really struck me about that last chapter, that last part that we did together. Nehemiah did this work, and then the revival came, and then the relapse came, right? So why would anybody do that? Why would anybody go through all the effort of being hyper vigilant about goal shift and all that brokenness and giving up comfort? Why would anybody do that? That's a fair question. And we're going to find the answer in an unexpected place, a prayer of confession. So I'm going to read the whole prayer of confession, and then I'll draw out a few comments about it. All right, here we are, Nehemiah chapter 9. This is the chapter I skipped last week when we were going through the second half of the book. Nehemiah 9, verse 5, "Blessed be your glorious name, and may it be exalted above all blessing and praise. You, Lord, are the only God. You created the heavens, the highest heavens with all their stars, the earth and all that is on it, the seas and all that is in them. You gave life to all of them, and all the stars of heaven worship you. You, the Lord, are the God who chose Abram and brought him out of Ur of the Chaldeans and changed his name to Abraham. You found his heart faithful in your sight and made a covenant with him to give him the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Jebusites, and Girgashites, to give it to his descendants. You fulfilled your promise, for you are righteous. You saw the oppression of our ancestors in Egypt, and you heard their cry at the Red Sea. You performed signs and wonders against Pharaoh, all his officials, and all the people of his land, for you knew how arrogantly they treated our ancestors. You made a name for yourself that endures to this day. You divided the sea before them, and they crossed through it on dry ground. You hurled their pursuers into the depths like a stone into raging water. You led them with a pillar of cloud by day and with a pillar of fire by night to illuminate the way that they should go. You came down on Mount Sinai and spoke to them from heaven. You gave them impartial ordinances, reliable instructions, and good statutes and commands. You revealed your holy Sabbath to them and gave them commands, statutes, and instructions through your servant Moses. You provided bread from heaven for their hunger. You brought them water from the rock for their thirst. You told them to go in and possess the land that you had sworn to give them. But our ancestors acted arrogantly. They became stiff-necked and did not listen to your commands. They refused to listen and did not remember your wonders you had performed among them. They became stiff-necked and appointed a leader to return to slavery in Egypt. But you are a forgiving God, gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in faithful love, and you did not abandon them. Even after they cast an image of a calf for themselves and said, "This is your God who brought you out of Egypt," and they'd committed terrible blasphemies, you did not abandon them in the wilderness because of your great compassion. During the day, the pillar of cloud never turned away from them, guiding them on their journey. And during the night, the pillar of fire illuminated the way they should go. You sent your good spirit to instruct them. You did not withhold your manna from their mouths, and you gave them water for their thirst. You provided for them in the wilderness 40 years, and they lacked nothing. Their clothes did not wear out, and their feet did not swell. You gave them kingdoms and peoples and established boundaries for them. They took possession of the land of King Sihon of Heshbon and the king Og of Bashan. You multiplied their descendants like the stars of the sky and brought them to the land that you told their ancestors to go in and possess. So their descendants went in and possessed the land. You subdued the Canaanites who inhabited the land before them and handed their kings and surrounding peoples over to them to do as they pleased with them. They captured fortified cities and fertile land and took possession of well-supplied houses, cisterns cut out of rock, vineyards, olive groves, and fruit trees in abundance. They ate, were filled, became prosperous, and delighted in your goodness. But they were disobedient and rebelled against you. They flung your law behind their backs and killed your prophets who warned them in order to turn them back to you. They committed terrible blasphemies. So you handed them over to their enemies who oppressed them. In their time of distress, they cried out to you, and you heard from heaven. In your abundant compassion, you gave them deliverers who rescued them from the power of their enemies. But as soon as they had relief, they again did what was evil in your sight. So you abandoned them to the power of their enemies who dominated them. When they cried out to you again, you heard from heaven and rescued them many times in your compassion. You warned them to turn back to your law, but they acted arrogantly and would not obey your commands. They sinned against your ordinances, which a person will live by if he does them. They stubbornly resisted, stiffened their necks, would not obey. You were patient with them for many years, and your Spirit warned them through your prophets, but they would not listen. Therefore, you handed them over to the surrounding peoples. However, in your abundant compassion, you did not destroy them or abandon them, for you are a gracious and compassionate God. So now, our God, the great, mighty, and awe-inspiring God who keeps his gracious covenant, do not view lightly all the hardships that have afflicted us, our kings and our leaders, our priests and prophets, our ancestors, and all your people from the days of the Assyrian kings until today. You are righteous concerning all that has happened to us, because you have acted faithfully while we have acted wickedly. Our kings, leaders, priests, and ancestors did not obey your law or listen to your commands or warnings you gave them when they were in their kingdom, with your abundant goodness that you gave them, and in the spacious and fertile land you set before them. They would not serve you or turn from their wicked ways. Here we are today, slaves in the land that you gave our ancestors so that they could enjoy its fruit and its goodness. Here we are, slaves in it. Its abundant harvest goes to the kings you set over us because of our sins. They rule over our bodies and our livestock as they please. We are in great distress. Their confession and prayer reminds me of a few big truths that motivate and inspire lay heroes. First, there is a bigger story and a bigger hero. There is a bigger story and a bigger hero. In this confession that we just heard, that the people gave, the Levites gave on behalf of the people to God, in this confession, we saw the big story, right? It started out with creation, and then God choosing Abraham, and then the Exodus, and the Old Covenant, and the Promised Land, the judges, the prophets, the exile. Every story referenced in Nehemiah is part of the big story, the story that God is telling, the story of God. Moses' story was in there. Joshua's story was in there. Prophets' stories were in there, but they are all part of the big story. Every lay hero story is part of the big story. Your lay hero story is part of the big story that God is telling, the story of God redeeming people, the story of God revealing himself to people. In this story in this confession that we just read, the people finally got it. They understood the plot of the big story, and they understood that it was about God, and they understood about God and his compassion and his kindness and his greatness, and that he was a God who keeps his covenant. They understood these things because of the little stories in the big story. If you are a lay hero, your story is part of the big story. Don't let that go by too quickly. I mean, think about it. It's so incredible. God is so gracious. He could demand our service, right, and give us nothing in return. But instead, he died for us when we had nothing to offer him and no interest in him. He is the reason that we have a story. He is the reason that we're part of the story in a good way, and not, like the Egyptians who suffered the plagues or the Canaanites who had to be driven out. In the book Visioneering, I referenced it in an earlier partner series. The author writes this: as Christians, we do not have a right to take our talents, abilities, experiences, opportunities, and education and then run off in any direction we please. We lost that right at Calvary. But then why would we dream of such a thing? God has a vision for your life. What could possibly be more fulfilling than that? And beyond that, we have no right to live visionless lives either. Ultimately, we are taking part in a massive assault that began one dark afternoon on a hill just outside of Jerusalem. Yeah. The confession that we read a few minutes ago was the beginning part of the story leading up to that massive assault that began one dark afternoon on a hill just outside of Jerusalem. Lay hero, your story is part of that massive assault on Satan's kingdom and the redeeming of God's people, a people for his very own. Lay hero, your story is part of the big story. Every lay hero in the story has acted heroically. That's just part of it. You can't be full of faith, right, and not act heroically. So every lay hero in the story has acted heroically, but their heroism wasn't enough. Every hero in God's story has also needed a hero. And God is the hero of every story in the big story. Moses, Joshua, the prophets, and others all acted heroically, but it was God who was the hero of their stories. God chose Abram. God performed signs and wonders against Pharaoh, this is verse 10. God divided the sea, verse 11. God led the way out, verse 12. God initiated the covenant, verse 14. God gave the manna, verse 20. God handed over their enemies, verse 24. God warned them to turn from their rebellion. God, 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 and God again. The hero of every story, make no mistake about it, whether you're reading about Daniel or you're reading about David or little Samuel in his bed, here I am, God, right? I'm listening. The hero of every story in the big story is God. And it's the same for you. Your heroic efforts won't be enough to turn the tide, to make the difference, to do the rescue, to do the good that you're hoping to see happen. Your heroic efforts won't be enough. You'll need a hero. Visioneering again. Apart from his intervention, God's intervention and preparation, you and I are incapable of pulling off even our small part of the operation. So this leads us to the lay hero principle of part 5. And it's simply this. God intends to be the hero of your lay hero story. God intends to be the hero of your lay hero story. God is the one who chose you to be in a relationship with him. He's the one who made you sensitive to the situation that he wants to address through you. He's the one who will resource you. He's the one who will support you. He's the one who will lead you. He's the one who will make your contribution a meaningful one. And he's the one who will reveal himself to you. He was the hero of your story long before you knew him. He will be the hero of your story until your assignment is finished and he brings you home to be with him. God intends to be the hero of your lay hero story. But that also means that he will be the one who gets the credit for all that happens through your story. Lay hero, the story is yours to experience and to tell. And the experiences of God that you're going to have in getting to know Jesus in a fresh way, and seeing another side of God that a lot of people don't get to see, that's yours as well. But the credit, the glory for being the hero, that's God's, because he's the hero of every lay hero story. So, when God uses you, right? He puts it on your heart that something has to be done about the character of your kids. And so he teaches you how to be intentional in your parenting, and you do it day in, day out, and you get resources. You get books off of that resource counter that we have here at the church. You do those things. You do all that, and you pray hard, and you work hard, and you refuse to give up. Right? When all that happens, you'll have experiences with God. You'll have stories to tell, but God will have been the one who will get the credit because God was the hero of that story. If your thing that God burdened you with was that stat that I rattled off a couple weeks ago about how the average nursing home resident gets one piece of mail a year and that bothered you, and you decide you're going to start doing something about it, and you go to nursing homes and you send more mail, you send greeting cards, you do whatever it is that God lays on your heart to do. You're going to act heroically. You're going to refuse to give up. When opposition comes or obstacles come, you're going to pray, you're going to adjust, and you'll get back to work. But at the end, though you do all of that and you've acted heroically, God's the one who multiplies that. God's the one who resources. God's the one who leads. And God is the one who will get the credit because He is the hero of your story. If your thing was you were praying desperately and diligently about somebody who's far from Jesus, who does not have a relationship with God, who doesn't know God like you do, but you long to see them. And so you do. You invest and you invite and you pray and you give and you look for an appropriate time. You pray the 4 open prayers or your grace bomb or whatever. You do all that heroic stuff. That's awesome. But at the end of the day, only God can change a heart. And so if that person's heart changes, God is the hero of that story. He was the hero of your story. He gave you what you needed, but He's the hero of the story because He's the one who changed the heart. If what God lays on your heart is missions, and so you get involved in some mission work or whatever, and God is the one. Even though you're doing a lot of work and you're acting bravely and courageously, God's the one who gives you the money to go on the mission trip. God's the one who gives you strength when yours is gone. God's the one who protects you when you drink the water or whatever it is, right? God is the hero of your story. Whatever it is that God lays on your heart to do, lay hero. He wants to be, and He intends to be the hero of your story. He intends to multiply your efforts. He intends to resource you, equip you, encourage you. Because He's the hero of that story, He's the one who gets the credit for being the hero. A couple more things as we come down the backstretch. Just in case you're wondering if your heroic action guarantees results, I want to address that. Will your heroic action guarantee that you'll get the results you want? I would love to say yes. That would be a lie. Your heroic action, I think, will guarantee results, but not necessarily the results you're hoping for. This is right in that prayer of confession that we listened to just a couple minutes ago. It is possible, lay hero, it's possible that the people that you try to help won't change. Won't change. And that's the result I'm sure you're hoping for, change. But hear me on this. You will get results because someday they will admit that God tried and they refused. Let me go back to that prayer, Nehemiah 9, verse 29. They're talking to God and they say, God, you warned them to turn back to your law, but they acted arrogantly and would not obey your commands. They sinned against your ordinances, which a person will live by if he does them. They stubbornly resisted. They stiffened their necks and would not obey. The prophets did not get the results that they wanted. God didn't get the results He wanted. But there was a result. Look at verse 33. These people's descendants later admit, God, you were righteous concerning all that has happened to us because you have acted faithfully while we have acted wickedly. The people you try to help may not change, but they will someday admit that God tried. God sent them you. God sent them you. God tried and you tried. And they will admit that, and credit in a weird kind of way, glory will go to God because they will admit, God, you tried and I refused. So you may not get the results you wanted, or you might, right? It's possible that God will use your efforts to bring about a significant change. We were just in Nehemiah 9. Did you notice the similarity between Nehemiah's prayer back in chapter 1 and the people's prayer here in chapter 9? Let me refresh your memory. This is Nehemiah 1. This is Nehemiah praying. Lord, the God of the heavens, the great and awe-inspiring God who keeps His gracious covenant with those who love Him and keeps His commands, let your eyes be open and your ears be attentive to hear your servant's prayer that I now pray to you day and night for your servants, the Israelites. I confess the sins we've committed against you. Both I and my father's family have sinned. We have acted corruptly toward you and have not kept the commands, statutes, and ordinances you gave your servant Moses. That was Nehemiah's prayer. Listen to the people's prayer again. This is Nehemiah 9, verse 32. So now, our God, the great and mighty and awe-inspiring God who keeps his gracious covenant. Does this sound familiar, right? They continue, do not view lightly all the hardships that have afflicted us, our kings and our leaders, our priests and our prophets, our ancestors and all your people from the days of the Assyrian kings until today. You are righteous concerning all that has happened to us because you have acted faithfully while we have acted wickedly. Don't miss this. People who were once apathetic, they were living there. The walls have been down for 140 years, and they're oblivious kind of to it. They just kind of gotten used to stepping over the rubble. They had gotten used to being despised by neighbors. They'd gotten used to being vulnerable and robbed and taken advantage of. People who were once apathetic are now confessing their sin and crying out to God. How did that happen? Nehemiah is how that happened. Right? I mean, yeah, it was God, but it was God through Nehemiah. Nehemiah helped them to see that the walls were their immediate problem, but not their greatest problem. And Nehemiah helped them to have God's perspective so that they could get God's blessing. And for a period of years, these people had God's blessing. How did that happen? Nehemiah, it is possible. Lay hero friend, it is possible. It is possible that something's going to change in someone's life. Your kids' lives, your friends' lives, somebody you don't even know's lives, some oppressed people groups' lives, some unreached people groups' life. It is possible that things are going to change and the people are going to go, how did that happen? And the answer is going to be God and you. You. God used you. That's how that happened. That's how that happened. Next thing. Just in case you're wondering whether it's worth it. Because, I mean, is that situation that you feel in your heart, that problem that you sense, is it all that bad? Does it really need your heroic intervention? Because after all, lots of people have learned to live with it. This is not new. It's been going on a while. So does it really require your heroic intervention? It does. It really is that bad, and it really does need your heroic intervention. I was really struck by those last couple of verses in the prayer of confession of the Israelites. They said, we are slaves in the promised land. They finally realized that they had been slaves in Egypt, and now they're in the promised land where they belong, but they are slaves. Everything they make is going to a king, and not their king. You might look at whatever situation it is, whatever that problem is that God keeps laying on your heart that you can't get away from, you can't seem to ignore. And like, well, how come I'm just going to ignore this like everybody else because this is normal. I mentioned a minute ago that the walls had been broken down for 140 years. It was normal. Normal was broken, right? Broken walls, vulnerable people group. That was normal. Hear me on this. Just because something's normal doesn't mean it's not terrible. Just because something's normal doesn't mean that it's acceptable. It just means it's been going on for a long time. I thought about this situation I'd heard about a few years ago. There was a missionary kid, a young teen girl, whose parents worked in the same mission organization that Mara and I worked in. And a representative from the mission agency had come to visit that family, check on them and stuff. And so during the course of the visit there, this visitor was going around the city with this young teenage girl. And they had to catch a cab to get to wherever they were going next. And when they got in the cab, the teenage girl kind of pushed the visitor out of the way so she could get into the cab first and slide it all the way across and then sit directly behind the driver. And the visitor thought that was kind of weird, because this girl had been very polite and courteous and everything else. But is what happened next that really caught the attention of the visitor. The girl reached in her pocket, pulled out her hand, and it was empty, didn't have it. So she bent over there in the back seat as the cab driver heads off to their next destination and took the shoelace out of her shoe and then kept it in her hand throughout the whole time that they were riding. When they got to their destination, they got out of the cab and went somewhere, and then the girl sat down in a nice safe bench there and then put the shoelace back in her shoe. And the visitor's like, this is weird and stuff. So eventually they asked the girl about it, like, what was that all about? And the girl, very calmly, as if this is completely normal, said, oh, well, I realized I didn't have anything, string or anything else with me. So, when I got in the cab there, I just, took my shoelace out so that in case the cab driver was kidnapping me, I knew I needed to sit right behind the driver, but then I could grab and take that shoelace, put it over his neck, and choke him until he relented and dropped me off wherever I was supposed to go or let me out of the cab. And the visitor said what really struck them was that this young teenage girl, like, this is completely normal. It's just completely normal to be thinking, oh, this person may try to kidnap me, so I just need to be prepared, and think nothing of that. Just because it's normal doesn't mean that's okay. A young teenage girl shouldn't have to wonder, will every stranger be a prospective kidnapper, right? Just because it's normal doesn't mean it's not terrible. Doesn't mean it's acceptable. And it's the same for you. If God lays something on your heart and he keeps pressing in on it, this is something that's got to be done. Even if it's normal, that just means it's been going on a long time. It doesn't mean that it's not terrible. All right, let's tie this together. Why would anyone be willing to be a lay hero? Why would anyone say, yes, God, I will feel the brokenness. I will let my heart beat with your heart. I'll give up my comfortable life. I'm willing to face obstacles and opposition, even though I know that the results that I want are not guaranteed. Why would anybody do that? Well, you might get the results. You might. You will definitely get stories. You will definitely have stories of experiences of God as he acts as the hero of your story. You will certainly get Jesus. Jesus never invites someone in to be close enough to feel his pain without him also revealing himself to them. You will get Jesus. And Jesus will get the credit and the joy of being your hero. So friends, act heroically. Be full of faith and not okay. May you pray for an opportunity to do something about the problem that God keeps bringing to your attention. Plan wisely. And when obstacles and opposition come, take them seriously. Go to God first. Pray. Adjust. And then get back to work. Be in community and be hyper-vigilant about goal shift. And remember that God intends to be the hero of your story. I want to end this series by doing something a little bit different. I want to pray a prayer blessing over you because this is what I sense that God wants me to do. And so I want to encourage you to do something. It's a little bit different. Perhaps even you'd like, ooh, that's weird. But I would love for you, if at all possible, to assume, if you want this prayer blessing, for you to assume a posture that indicates that you are receiving this blessing. So you could stand up and just imagine that I'm standing there with you and I'm praying this blessing over you. Or perhaps the right posture for you would be to stay seated, but to put your hands out like this, like you're ready to receive something, like I'm handing you something and you're going to receive this prayer of blessing. And maybe you'll even want to close your eyes when I pray this prayer. Maybe it's to kneel down, get out of, as weird as it sounds, to get out of your seat and just kind of drop a knee and imagine that I'm standing over you, and maybe I even put my hand on your shoulder and I pray this blessing upon you. But whatever that is, I encourage you, if this is making sense to you, if this series has resonated with you in some way, that you assume a posture right now to receive the blessing that I believe God wants me to pray over you. Are you ready? Here it is. May the Lord, the God of the heavens, the great and awe-inspiring God who keeps his promises, be the hero of your story. May you always indulge the longings of your new heart and sit patiently before your God until you have heard from him and experienced his presence. May you be full of faith and not okay. May you have the wisdom of God for the plans that you make. May God himself go with you, to resource you, to renew your courage, to give you insight when you face opposition or obstacles, to be your strength when yours is gone, to be your peace when you experience loss, and to be your prize when you experience success. May you live in community with other lay heroes and be part of a cord of three strands that is not easily broken. May you recognize the very first instances of goal shift and recenter your affections without delay. May God reveal himself to you and through you. May your life be rich with stories, and may you be fully alive, fully human. May God bless you and the world through you. Amen.